super, well, I have ADHD too, so my
Yeah.
brain just decided it was going to fizzle out a little bit, but
It's like,
I literally just had a thought and it went right away.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Mom Mentality Podcast, where today we're going to kind of peel back the curtain on the raw and real and often unseen struggles of motherhood through the lens of ADHD and perfectionism, all amidst the whirlwind of the holiday season. With us is the incredibly insightful Ashley O. We're going to leave it at that because I do not want to butcher her name and I can't seem to get it together. She is a fellow parent coach, a mother to 3 wonderfully active boys, and a passionate advocate for mental health and ADHD awareness. Ashley's journey to motherhood was marked by stark challenges of comparison, perfectionism, and the isolating feeling of struggling in silence. However, her path took a transformative turn with a dual diagnosis of ADHD for both her oldest son and herself. This redefined her understanding of personal battles and breakthroughs. Together, we're going to dive deep into the heart of early motherhood struggles and the momentous journey towards an ADHD diagnosis, and how this journey reshapes the lens through which we view perfectionism, especially in the glare of holiday expectations. Ashley shares her invaluable insights on advocating for yourself and your child, strategies to manage sensory overload, and the profound importance of self-compassion during this festive chaos. Ashley, we are so grateful to have your openness, your wisdom, your unwavering spirit, and everything else about you on our podcast. To our listeners, remember, you're not alone in this journey. So let's get into this story and you can understand more of the ins and outs of ADHD and how that's affecting motherhood. Welcome to Mom Mentality, your virtual village of support. I'm Jessica Campbell, your family wellness coach, and I am committed to helping you prioritize your and your family's well-being. This podcast will be like your favorite ladies group chat come to life. We'll share the ups and downs of life for moms just like you, get real advice from coaches and experts, and I'll pop in with my own stories and tips on everyday challenges to the big questions. Whether you're juggling work from home, balancing adult life with parenthood, tackling ADHD, yours or your kids, or just trying to catch a breath, Mom Mentality is your spot. As we all turn on our holiday cheer, I understand that you wear all the hats, but let's not forget you're on the top of the gift list too. This season, give yourself the gift of downtime with Wildflower Pop self-care gift baskets. Imagine a moment just for you, embraced by the warmth of self-love and a peaceful break from your endless to-do list that's now doubled in holiday cheer. If no one has told you lately, you deserve every bit of relaxation. Your sanctuary of serenity awaits. Check out the link in the show notes to grab yours.
So can you tell us a little bit about the specific challenges that you encountered during your first years of motherhood?
Yeah. So first off, I have 3 boys. I had 3 boys in 5 years. So like, I think for anyone that was a
Oh, wow.
lot, right? Like, but especially for me, I able to overcome my challenges by like my skills, my knowledge, maybe some anxiety, but overall I was able to do it. But this was different. I was overwhelmed all the time, very emotional. I felt like I was the only one struggling this much. You know, everyone has like the motherhood stuff, but the
Right.
the struggles just felt so extreme, and I just felt like misunderstood as well. I feel like with all the people who had kids, my family, they would give me well-meaning advice, but it just made me feel worse, like I was broken and something was wrong. So that's just like the underlying feeling I always felt, was that something was wrong with me, and that's why this was so hard. I was the reason that this was challenging. I just also remember feeling like I wanted to escape. So I remember, obviously you have those crazy nights when you're having your kids wake up all the time.
Right.
Sleep challenges with ADHD is a real thing. So all that kind of stuff with my kids. And I just remember like losing my mind on my kids sometimes, like in the middle of the night, like it was really, really bad. So
Right.
and then I also remember just like a crippling anxiety when we need to like go out to do something, because I was just like, all right, what are all the scenarios that are going to happen? Like, is he going to run away? Is this going to
Right.
happen? Like, is he going to be able to socialize with other kids? Like, just all the constant chatter in my brain was just a lot. And I think for me, even I got to a point where I was like, all right, how can I escape this? Like, I never thought about necessarily harming myself, but I was like, if I
Right.
get into a small car accident, I'm going to go to the hospital for a while and I can get a break. Like, that's the kind of thought I felt, right? And it was
That reminds me of
real.
that movie. That movie Bad Moms, when she's like, sometimes I just think about the vacation. It's a very real
It
thing.
is so real. Yeah, it was like, and I remember hearing years later another mom in a group I was in said that exact same thing, and I just felt so understood and seen. I just didn't ever feel that during those periods of time. That was, I think,
Right.
my biggest struggle was I was struggling and no one got it. And no one was like, this isn't you. This is just
Right.
what you're dealing with. This is untreated ADHD. This is all those things. Like no one really
Right.
did that for me, not anybody. Right. So I think that was really very hard for me. Like those would be some of the most difficult moments that I could sort of lay out. And
Right. That kind of like shame spiral. Cause then when you think stuff like that, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I even thinking? Like,
yeah,
why can't I just be a normal mom and do
exactly.
the normal things? Like, I should be
Exactly.
happy. I shouldn't feel like this. And of course, the
Exactly.
shooting on yourself. Yeah. Yeah. I totally
Exactly.
resonate with that.
Exactly. So just the
Yeah.
constant back and forth with that. And yeah, like I think honestly, my identity was just so jumbled up. I didn't even know who I was anymore. It was a lot. And I just
Right.
was in that survival mode for a long time. I honestly feel like this is probably the first time in my life where I'm not feeling like that all the time. Like,
Right.
and it's been a journey to get here.
So
Yeah.
specifically thinking back on those moments and those thought processes and your
Mhm.
day-to-day, I guess, routines, what would you say were the most difficult moments for you during that time? And like, how did you handle those situations as you were going through it?
Yeah, I think anytime we had to hang out with other kids, like when I had
Mhm.
went other around other people, that was one of my more difficult moments because again, I think it was like that perception of like, I'm a very open person, but I still
Mhm.
felt the judgment from
Mhm.
people about what my kid was doing. I felt scared because again, I had someone who was a runner, right? He was all about
Right.
elopement. He's like, how can I escape any situation? And then there's more than one of them and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. So I think for me, it was like I was always trying to pre-plan everything that could happen because that's how I did it in the past, right? In the past, I had just been able to over-plan things and
Right.
I could overcome it with all that kind of stuff and it wasn't working anymore. So I think that's where like the struggles were most evident was
Right.
like when I was trying to use those skills, it was like these really overwhelming moments and they didn't work anymore. And that's when I
Right.
would go into like the shame spiral of,
Right.
it's me. I am the problem, those kind of things. So, and just the sensory stuff too, like with my kids, like they're very like my oldest is a sensory seeker. Like as a baby, he needed to be like, I'm talking like you would have to jump up and down to rock him, just extremeness.
That's like my middle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the sound machine in his ear had to be so loud. I'm like, he probably has hearing loss. Like just crazy stuff like that I was like, I don't think this is normal, but so those were struggles, like always trying to figure out how I can do this for him without like ignoring all my needs at that point, right?
Right.
I was just trying to
Right.
survive with trying to make them somewhat happy and normal.
Right, right. Quote unquote normal. People talk about midlife crises and stuff, but really becoming a mom is like that identity crisis in
Yeah,
itself, and a lot of people don't talk about that, and so much of our society is based around like moms give everything and they have to be the last person.
yeah,
And I mean, not even just moms, because I was raised by my dad, and his was very similar. Like, you work all the time, make sure that your
mhm,
kids' needs are met, and even though he couldn't handle certain needs, he knew he could always make sure there was food on the table, always make sure like we had
yeah,
certain things. And he was like dead last on that
yeah,
like totem pole. And yes, your kids definitely need to come first in a lot of ways, but if you don't take care of yourself and you don't know how to take care of yourself, or you don't have that support
yeah,
system, it makes
mhm,
it very hard. And then you end up lashing out even when you don't want to,
yeah,
because you're like depleted.
yeah. You're done. Exactly. You have
Yeah, but
nothing
there's like
left.
that deep belief that this is just what you do. That's how it
Yeah.
works. That's parenthood.
Yeah, I've even through just starting my coaching journey as well, I feel like I have seen it's like something is going to happen in your life to sort of push you towards that change. If you're going to make the change in your life, if you're going to make the
Right.
change to not just shame yourself and have compassion for yourself, if you're going to make the change to heal from everything that's happened in your life. So for me, it was parenting, right? It was for,
Right.
and some people, their parenting journey is, I don't want to say easier because it's never easier. It's always hard, but
Right.
is less completely demolishing their life, right? So
Right.
so I like maybe something a death in the family happens later and then that's
Right.
when it comes out for them. So
Right.
I might feel a little lucky that I came earlier, right? Like I didn't
Right.
something else happened. So it
Better sooner than later.
yeah, I had no choice. It was like it pushed me to the edge of like, okay, I have a choice. I can stay here forever and be miserable, or I can do something. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. I have a friend that we grew up together, and she was kind of a wild child. She was that child that needed the connection. And like it's really interesting to see, and we've talked about these things and how her childhood was so different, and now she's kind of like swung the opposite way, and becoming a mom just seemed like such a breeze for her. Like she was like all natural, everything. She stayed home. She's so like good with teaching and homeschooling and all the things. And then I'd be like, well, how come so many of these people, like, it levels them out? They're like, yes, now I've got it. This is my thing. And I've always wanted to be a mom. And then when it happened, and with my first, it was pretty good. Aside from like my husband and I having like a lot of
growing
like
challenges.
he was working overnights and stuff, so we had a lot of our own issues, like trying to get on the same page, and like fighting over what time needs to be spent where and all that stuff. But like as far as with my child, I had some postpartum depression, but we did good, and I took her to the things and whatever. And then my second came, and we went into the pandemic, and that was harder.
Yeah, I mean,
she's a sensory seeker, so she was wild. She's still just wild, but now I understand her better and have some tools. And now my youngest, that was by far my worst postpartum, and she's 18 months now, and I was in such a dark place. And that's when I finally got to the point of like an ADHD diagnosis for me and my oldest. But like it through all of that time, like I was like, oh, I don't know why people need time away from their kids when I have my oldest. Like I love being with her. And now that I've got 3, I'm like, please take them anywhere. I don't
That's why you're hiding in your closet right now.
Yeah, like I need silence just to like sit and hear nothing or just zone out. And it is one of those things, like you see everyone handle it so differently. And especially when that's all you've ever wanted. I never knew what I wanted to do in life. I just knew I wanted to be a mom. And I'm like, that's my thing. And then when it gets there and it's not at all what you expected. Like I knew my kids would drive me crazy. And I used to say, my kids are going to drive me crazy in the best way. And they do, and they don't. Like I also was just like off my rocker for a while. And so it's interesting, and it's hard to not feel alone when everybody's experience is so unique to them. And even though we all have such similarities, they're also just so unique. It's hard to not feel alone when you don't have that validation or like, again, the support system. I know you said you wanted to escape and you never got to the point of like wanting to harm yourself, but can you speak a little bit more to the mental health side of it? Like how that was affecting you, feeling like that and going through those motions? How was that mentally affecting you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is what pushed me towards that diagnosis, because for my kid, that was like where we went first, right? For him, I knew when he came out instinctually that he was special. You know what I mean? Like there was something different about this guy. His eyes were wide open 2 seconds after he came out, and I was like, "Is that normal?" And they're like, "No, not really." So I just for him, I don't know that I would have sought this stuff out, like the mental health side of it, on my own per se. I had done therapy things in the past, but ADHD is such and postpartum depression, all of those. Cause I think I never got diagnosed with it, but I had elements of that. They're so taboo, right? Like people have a very specific view of what that looks like. And if you're in that box, then they think a certain way of you. And so there's like that, overcoming that is like part of it, right? So I think having the catalyst of my son sort of having all these things and maybe questioning sometimes if I'm just making this up or not. We then had like a preschool teacher who told us, oh, okay, here's the challenges he's having at school. And that's what pushed us towards his diagnosis, was having external people tell me, oh no, you're not crazy. This is actually happening. And then getting his diagnosis was like, oh, okay. Like all these little dots started connecting for myself, where, the anxiety that I had, because I had anxiety as an adult as well. It was a comorbidity of ADHD, right? It was, and I don't even know if I would have had it had I not had untreated ADHD, right? Like, who knows? So it's just so interesting how things are interconnected, and something can cause something else. And, what is our catalyst towards like pushing ourselves to actually seek a diagnosis or treatment or those kind of things. And the difference, like you don't even realize how like imprisoned you are by it when you're in that moment, right? Because it's overwhelming, but it's all you know. But then on the other side of it, now I can look back and be like, wow, I'm so much more free now. And there's still challenges, obviously, but like there's a different freedom about it, openly talking about it, having actual medical professionals tell me that, no, this is actually real stuff that's happening to you. And you're not just making it up in your mind. And then in turn, being able to help other people with it is super rewarding. And I guess if I'm talking to other people about this, I want them to know that there is hope on the other side if you take those first steps. And it could be a tiny baby step. It could be just telling one person, hey, I'm struggling with these things. Can you help me brainstorm, what my next step will be if it's too overwhelming for you, like reaching out and asking for that help or something, right? Because being stuck in that place is just it's not living, right? It's not what we're meant to be. It's not our true self, our true personality coming out, right?
That's a conversation I've had with some people, especially in my family. a lot of the medicines or the this or the that. And like they wanted to diagnose my sister when she was younger. And my dad's like, she's a kid. She's not going to just sit still.
Yeah.
And now she's got OCD and all these things. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and the thing of it is like, I don't have my daughter medicated, but I am medicated. And I was looking for that. So mine's kind of the opposite. I was looking for me. And then I was like, does she have it? Or am I just trying to look for that diagnosis? Because people say like, everyone just needs a diagnosis. But it's so true. It's so like freeing to have somebody say there's a reason and you don't feel so broken in that.
Yes, exactly.
And I even notice it, and like it's helped me with my daughter because I'm like when she does something, I'm like, yeah, she's behaving like her mom.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
She's trying to walk out of the house with no shoes. This is fine. Like I'm like, girlfriend, where are your shoes? Like you just are gonna stroll out of the house, go to gymnastics and not put any shoes on. And I think that's a whole other part of the stigma too, is kids being medicated and like when and when not to. And so we homeschool. So I'm just trying to work on like giving her those tools. But it makes me wonder if someone had taken it seriously enough to give me the tools, even if I didn't really have ADHD, but those tools maybe helped me in certain areas, that could be so beneficial for our kids, for ourselves. My life would be totally different now if I knew then what I know now. And it's just it is one of those things like in the time you don't realize. Like I just felt broken for like my whole life. Like why can't I just clean my house? Why can't I just get it together? Why is it every time I take my kids out, I feel like it's the most taxing job just to get everyone dressed and go to the car. Like I don't want to go anywhere.
Those
and my
transitions.
therapist is like, I didn't know you felt like that. I'm like, yes, everything feels like such a freaking job. Like the energy it takes to do everything. And before, like, I didn't think of it in terms of how much energy I was putting out to that, or like how my brain thinks of the steps or, you know, whatever. Before I was just, it's like, I just sit on the couch. Like, it's not that hard talking to my, like
you
yelling
beat
at
yourself
myself.
up about it. Yeah, exactly.
What is wrong with you? Just clean, like, or help your kid make the breakfast. And I don't think people realize when you don't have it, which is totally funny because I think my dad does have it, but he won't admit it.
Of course.
Like when you don't have it, it's very hard. It's very hard to really understand it. And I think that's where that makes such a divide, because even my husband sometimes will be like, well, why don't you just do this? Or I'll
Exactly.
be like, I really want to do this, but I can't. And then he's like, well, just do it. And I'm like, no, I can't. And he's like, why not? And I'm like, I don't know. Or I'll be like, that's a joke. I literally, I want to, but it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. No, you can't. That overcoming that hump to initiate a task initiation is so hard. And it does, you know, a lot of the ADHD symptoms come across as just like character flaws, right? Like that's the hard part.
You're lazy.
Exactly. Like lazy or like emotional or, you know, like you're not responsible. You lose all your stuff. Like all those things. Yeah. It's so true. And I even just talk about what you talk about with your daughter, like you're making her feel seen and for who she is, because you're able to say, oh, you got it from me. And like, you know, you have some tools probably. So you're probably sharing those with her, and just the difference that she'll have in her life, because she can then hold on to that identity. And, you know, the ADHD isn't the excuses to do everything in life, right? But it's also like it helps us from just like a self-love, self-compassion perspective, right? To understand that it is harder for me to do some things, and actually way easier to do other things, because we're awesome at so many things, right?
So I work as a para, and I've volunteered for Girl Scouts and all the things, and I love business techie stuff, and I just love it. And so people are like, man, how did you do that? And I'm like, oh, it's nothing. But I had heard another podcast of someone talking about that, where you think it's nothing, but people are like, wow, no, people get paid good money to do this or that. And I'm like, oh, well, to me, it just seems easy. So it can't be that big a deal. Anybody can do it. And they're like, no, not anybody. But so it is interesting. And that's how we worked on like her homeschool, finding the things that interest her, because she's so smart when she is engaged. Other times she's just like I can tell that. So we definitely try to like tailor those things for her. But
that makes sense.
Even just modeling that, looking for the tools if you don't have them yet, finding what works for you, I think is so beneficial for our kids. And it's almost more of a blessing, I think, when we have kids who have ADHD or some type of neurodivergence, and their parent does too, because we get to model that for them of how we handle those challenges. So it's nice to have have both of us. We actually got diagnosed a week apart.
Oh, look at that. That's beautiful.
Kind of like a new journey for everybody.
Yeah. I love it.
So how did your son being diagnosed shift your perspective on your personal struggles? Like, how were you able to connect those dots?
Well, my hyper focus is ADHD. So I was like, oh, I'm going to dive into this to the extreme, right? So, and the drive to figure his stuff out, like I just started connecting the little dots between like some of the things that I had seen in him, because obviously it manifested differently in me growing up.
Right.
And then I went down the rabbit hole of like women and ADHD, and it just started connecting so many dots for me, like all kinds of things, like the ability to finish tasks and have deadlines and finish them. I had always struggled with that. And I like always got out of it somehow. Like I would wait till the last second, use that procrastination to knock out amazing stuff, and everybody be like, wow. But I, was anxiety ridden while doing it. So just like the little things that I had learned from him, like the symptoms, the impulsivity, even the hyperactive brain, like I started making connections into, I was like, people don't think like this. People aren't like having 7,000 thoughts at the same time. They're able to just be quiet in their brains. I was like, what is that? So it just started making light bulbs go inside of me, like all these things that I had experienced that I just thought everyone was like, or again, I had attributed to me being like messed up or something like that. It just felt true for me too. And it was very much, okay, let me seek this. I wanted the official diagnosis because also I wanted to try medication, but also just for the validation that again, I wasn't making it up, because even now when I tell people, some people are like, you don't have ADHD. Like, what are you saying? You're a high achiever. Like, you have done all these things. You're not hyper, those are the kind of things that I'm like,
you can keep it together. I actually had a counselor in college tell me, you probably have ADHD, but we're not going to diagnose you because you're handling it well. And then I left school for psychology to go to school to do hair. And now I'm back to all the psych, brain science, parent coaching. And I'm like, was I really handling it well? Or
exactly.
How much different could it have been back then if you had just helped me with what I needed?
It's so true. And for women, it's like such an internal struggle a lot of times and not external. So then everyone thinks we're doing fine because we're really good at masking it and making everybody else feel comfortable. But and it's, I guess for little boys it's more freeing because they just let it all hang out and do what they need to do. Although there's issues with their own self-esteem when it comes to that, because they're getting all these constant like reprimands. I'll be so interested to see like the research over the next decade on women and ADHD, now that we have like a bigger uptick in women being diagnosed
and later in life too. It's like it's very interesting for sure. What was your experience when you were getting diagnosed? How did you go about it? And was there any kind of, oh man, like I can't believe I have this? Or was it all just like, oh, finally somebody can tell me what's going on here?
I mean, I think for me, no, I think it was very validating. That was like the biggest overarching emotion. I think I was a little bit like, the whole time I still had this imposter syndrome, even during like the testing. Even when I got it, I was like, am I just, did he just give that to me because he felt like I needed it? Like, did the pathologist give it to me because he felt bad for me? I still have that imposter syndrome inside of me where it was like, am I making this up? Right. Because I think nobody else talks about it. Nobody talked about it in my life. It wasn't something that was brought up. I'm like the first person in my family who's really going to get these diagnoses, even though I know I'm not the only one who probably has it, So I think it was validating, but then there's that other side of like the external world and their reactions to it. And that has been sometimes challenging. It's been a journey of truly standing in my own confidence about it, to realize even with a medical diagnosis, I'm still questioning myself sometimes. So it's like pushing those doubts away and realizing like, no, like I can stand in this identity. I have this, and also I'm so much more than this. So
we're also coming into holiday season.
Well, that's fun.
So I do want to touch on some of that, because I think that's it. That's such a tough time of year, especially when you struggle with that. And often like perfectionism is a trait of ADHD, like that. And that's probably partially the masking too, is like wanting things to be done a certain way to, sort of correct what you feel like is wrong. But how do you think that perfectionism contributes to the inadequacy or the imposter syndrome that we feel, especially in the holiday time, but in general, but also like with the holidays coming back?
First, I think like if we just take a higher level of like generally being a mom right now and a woman, really, we have all this access to information. We have social media, and it's amazing and also toxic, right? Like at the same time, because it sometimes we see the real side of things. We see people are being more honest and open about their experiences, and then it gives you a little bit of feeling like you don't have to be perfect. But then I also think there's just so much information out there that there's this impossible standard to have and do all the things,
right?
And especially like this is supposed to be the most important job of your life as a mom, right? That should be the most important job, right? So like I need to do this really well, and if I'm struggling with one of these things, then I must be messed up and broken, right? Like that is the feeling that I get. I think that will be sort of how I connect all those things, is like the outside world making me feel like I need to be perfect. My own brain, like I just think that's how our brains work. We're always looking for the most efficient way to do things. Maybe it's because we don't want to do things because we don't have patience, right? Like maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's just different things driving that. That idea of trying to have things be the most efficient, the most perfect side of things. For me, it's been a long journey to come from that, to realize like, no, like we are exactly who our kids need. We're enough. We don't need to be these Pinterest moms, you know. And also I think the other side is like, we're also worth getting healthy for, not necessarily just for our kids, that we don't have to be this perfect person, that we can let go of all these beliefs that we have, where we can be free, that we do it for ourselves too. Our needs are important. Going back to what you talked about earlier with like, you know, we always put our needs last, but in reality, if we're going to do this for ourselves, if we're going to give ourselves that grace, if we're going to really heal from the inside out, then we're going to show up in a healthy way, and not just in a way to put up a front like everybody wants to see this version of yourself. We're not forcing ourselves to be a certain way and trying to will ourselves into being good enough, right? It's almost like breaking down that identity issue we're having and rebuilding it back up with our own beliefs that we're enough, you know?
I was recording another podcast, and we were talking about wanting to show up in a way that's for other people. Like you have to be able to want to do it for yourself, because if you don't, if you're just saying, I'm going to heal and I'm going to do better for my kids, then you're not really fully open to it. And you have to want to do it for yourself, because otherwise you're going to be like, oh, I can do this for an external source. And so it really limits you until you're in that place and you're ready to do that for you. You're only going to get so far. And I think that's really important to touch on.
It's so true. And I think that's part of that perfectionism, right? Like when you want to do it for yourself and you're giving yourself the grace and the self-compassion, then that's giving you the freedom to let go of that perfectionism, right? Like your kids don't need you to be perfect. They don't even want you to be perfect, right? Sometimes we learn more when we're not perfect, and we show them how to handle the non-perfection, right? They learn more through that avenue than us being perfect all the time.
Absolutely. Thinking about having ADHD and having a child with ADHD and going through the holidays, a lot of sensory overload can come with that. And even though, like you said, your oldest is very sensory seeking, there's still often a lot of times, especially with family members and running around all day. If you go to like multiple Thanksgivings or Christmases or whatever, for one, how can ADHD make that magnified, those sensory overloads, like all the usual things? How is ADHD contributing to making that harder? And then do you have any strategies for people going through that holiday season on how to kind of minimize that sensory overload?
I mean, definitely, like, because I have 3 kids and they all have their own sensory, unique sensory needs, right? So I got some sensory avoiders in my house too, for sure. I think also for the sensory seekers, there's this fine line between overstimulation and understimulation. And like, you're like, which side am I on? Because sometimes the reactions are the same, right? If they're over or understimulated. So for sure that contributes to a lot of it, right? When you're going through situations. I think from a strategy perspective, I think the first thing is being confident in your parenting and your boundaries, right? Like when you're coming into a situation with family, especially, I feel like there's this pressure sometimes to feel like you need to accommodate everything that they want in those moments. You know, you have to give a hug to every single family member. You have to do all these things. Like you need to sit at the table for the entire time. Like you need to open up every gift and everyone watches you and say thank you. So I think
try every food.
Exactly. So I think going in, the first step in my mind is having my own confidence. Like, here's what I'm going to allow. Here's what I'm not going to allow. Here's where I know from just knowing my kid, he's going to do well in this situation. If I see it going off the rails, what is my plan? So sometimes I would take my oldest, I would take him separately to a separate room, and we would just calm down and like have some moments to decompress from everything that was happening. I tried to do it before he went into a meltdown, but sometimes after the meltdown, right? And trying to do it in a way where it's not making him feel shame for having that happen, right? That like explaining like, hey, this is overwhelming for anybody, but especially you. So it's, I think, having my own confidence and my own boundaries around sort of where I need to step in, where I can let him sort of figure it out a little bit. And then I think on the other side, and it depends on your family situation, but like advocating for them, right? So coming in before with your family and being like, hey, here's the deal. This is what we are able to do. Here's what we're not able to do. Can we maybe like switch this one thing up so that they're less stimulated? Can we do this? Can we do that? Or even just like setting a standard and being like, this is what's going to happen. And I understand that may not be what you expected. So like giving them space to process that, but at the same time, still knowing what your kid needs and advocating for that's important. So there's like an element of grieving certain things things, like there are certain things I just know that we won't do with our kids. We just won't. And other people will probably do them, and that's fine. And there's a period where I felt bad about that. Like, oh my gosh, why can't my kids just do this, 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 and this? But like now I'm like, there's lots we can do where it's the positive. We don't have to do everything. For us, we had gone to 2 family houses in the same day, and we had to set a boundary. Like, we can't do that. That's too much. That's too much for me, and I'm an adult. So it's way too much for these kids. Or like, we are not going to go see this one big event because I just know it's going to be too much for them. So we just won't do it, and that's fine.
Yeah, we started implementing like rotating holidays because like most of the time we go to like my sister's or my house. So we started implementing because we were going to like 3 Thanksgivings in a day, even like when she was little, like my oldest was little. And so we just started saying, okay, we're just going to rotate it on the day. And then if somebody else wants to have something too, we'll do that on a different day. And they'll just get like the weekend holiday or whatever when we plan that. And that significantly helped us. Also talking to them prior, like if you could give a tip on how to most effectively communicate that to family, how would you go about that?
Well, I guess first off, nonviolent communication, right? Like that, the idea behind you observe what's happening, you make your feelings known, your need, and then you make the request. I think if you come in there with a sense of, I'm not attacking you, I'm not trying to attack, because I think that's where it can go sometimes with family, especially if we have family where our communication hasn't always been healthy. So I think planning before you're coming in to be like, I have observed that, or I've noticed that this is what happens with my kid. He loses his mind if he's forced to sit at the table, or if he has to sit at the table for like this amount of time. So we're going to do this. My feeling about it is this. What's your feeling? Like giving them space to sort of process that and understanding that maybe in the end, you may not get, full compliance about it. But if I am, I guess, grounded and holding respect for them when I'm talking about it, then that's really all I can do, right? I can come, and as long as I'm not being accusatory and as long as I'm not, just calling out things negatively, then I think that would be sort of how I approach it. And then even, I think being prepared is always the most helpful thing. Like practicing that before you come in and have those conversations. And then even practicing how am I going to handle it when I'm in that situation? Because you might get comments back about things. You might get explosion. So how am I going to ground myself and keep myself cool in these moments? Like what is even my kid's gonna have a meltdown, what's my meltdown avoidance or my meltdown sensory calming tools, right? Like what are my
that's what I was gonna say. Like I think when you come to it from a place of being grounded, it makes it much easier when and if there's usually somebody who's gonna push back, especially in this day and age. We're still in that, I hate to say it in the slang term, but that like boomer mentality versus like the newer kind of styles of parenting. And so there tends to always be a comment from somebody, but when you come to it from a grounded space, it makes it much easier for you to say, okay, well, if this isn't where you want to go with that, then we're going to choose to step back out of that and do it in a respectful way where it's not like, well, you're not listening, and have a big explosion, because you're grounded enough to say, this is what we expect. If you don't want to respect that boundary, then we are going to choose to not participate or whatever. And it makes that confrontation a little bit smoother, I think.
And even I think giving some space to have like a back and forth solutioning as well. Like, hey, here's my thoughts. Do you have any thoughts how we can make this work? Here's the needs. Like, so I don't know. I think having back and forth and giving them the space sometimes helps. And going back to what I said previously, it's like you need to come in knowing what you're confident in as a parent. Like it's been a long journey for me. I did not feel like that at the beginning during those 8 years of chaos, right? And I think I'm finally getting to that point, partly because I'm seeing this long-term parenting that we're doing, right? I'm seeing the results of it. I'm seeing my kids literally problem solve with each other in the moments in like conflict. Sometimes I'm seeing my kids come and apologize to me before I even say anything about what happened. I'm seeing them use tools to go regulate with the things we've worked on instead of losing their mind, right? So I'm like, wow, I'm like, they're more mature than me. Like, this is amazing. So I'm confident going in that and I wasn't always like that. So it was different in the past with holidays, but now it's like, I know my kids are good, man. They're probably gonna have a meltdown, and that's fine because we're not perfect, right? And here's how we're gonna handle it, and I'm not going to allow anybody else to put shame on them, so I'm gonna handle it in a way that makes sense. And sometimes I still fail, but like that's the goal, right? That's the goal. So
it's more than having your kids back. It's having your own back and knowing that you don't need somebody else to tell you how it should be done. You know your family better than anybody else. So
true.
You guys get to make that decision, not anyone else.
And then that also gives me perspective also when thinking about other families, and like if I'm around other people, like I think going through this life, it gives me less judgment, right? When I walk into a situation to know I don't know their family situation. And so I need to respect what they're doing as long as everyone's safe.
For the moms who do have ADHD or just get overstimulated overstimulated in general with the holidays and being around family. What kind of self-care practices do you recommend for them to go a little smoother through the holidays?
I mean, I think like if you think about like long-term kind of stuff, I think it's a little bit of a journey to get to that point because everybody has different things that work for them. And you have to just like muscles, you have to like work them. You have to practice before you get into a situation and understand where your triggers are, what your body's feeling like in those moments, and be able to have that understanding of, okay, my like thermometer's rising and I feel like my body's going here. I know I've practiced this 5 times. And so for me, like honestly, I rub my thighs. That's like the sensory thing for me.
Yeah.
That's one of my things that I know, like, whew, okay. I don't know. I almost feel like a lot of it is like the work before you get into the situation, right? Like,
so if you're starting, like someone just listened to this and they're just starting now on their journey, it might be more of a, as you go through these holidays, knowing it's going to be a stressor, kind of paying attention to those things and really figuring out your triggers first as your self-care.
Yeah.
Rather than having actual practices yet.
Yeah, I'd say that's part of it. I mean, if like there could be sensory stuff. Like for me, I have noise canceling headphones. So I like, or the little loop earplugs. So I stick those in. And if I know it's going to be loud, then I put those in for a period of time. And then that immediately brings my nervous system into a better state. You know, maybe it's, if you're sensitive to sound, make sure you have some earplugs, maybe build in some breaks during the time you're there. So like, even if it's just 5 minutes in a different room or in the bathroom, even, right? Like when you think it might be a little more quiet, give yourself a little bit of that self-care. And then I think also, I heard someone describe it like this, like when you have 2 islands and your old island is like the old way of doing things. Like that's what you normally are used to. And it has really great infrastructure, like really nice bathrooms, all kinds of stuff. And then you're building your new island, which is like the new way of handling things, maybe not losing your mind when sensory things happen, or understanding your needs and be able to build them up. And that one has like a porta potty, right? So you're on this porta potty island and you come back into your family situation and that beautiful island with all of the infrastructures there. So it's easy to just jump back into that island because it's just so nice and built up. So that's why I say with the journey, like you have to keep building that infrastructure on that new island with your new, belief systems, your new confidence in yourself, healing old patterns, practicing your skills before you get into it so that it's a little stronger and more appealing to stay on that new island.
Right. Like right. Because that toilet might look nice, but it might back up all the time.
It's so true. That's so true. Exactly. So it's, you hope that eventually you won't swim back to the old island as much because you have built up these tools, but giving yourself grace to know that if you do swim back to the old island, it happens, right? You can repair, like you can fix whatever happened by repairing, by apologizing if you did something, by, figuring out a new strategy next time and reflecting. So it's not like, the end of the world, right? Like give yourself grace. Don't put this pressure, perfectionism, like you have to be perfect, and celebrate those little wins. Like if you only lost your mind twice during this, holiday instead of, or during this day, or instead of 10 times, that's like a big deal, or even if it's 9 instead of 10, like that's something to celebrate. And next year you can go for 8, right? So
and I think it's important to note too, because you said you have the loop earplugs, which I ordered some like knockoff brands, so I'd still like to try the regular ones, but I feel suffocated when I have earplugs in. I feel like I am just, because for me, I think that's also part of my trauma though. I am like hyper vigilant. I need to hear the things going on, but if it's too much noise, I have to like turn stuff down. But I feel like I'm just like, I take my dogs on a walk in the morning and I was like, this is going to be a great time to like listen to music, listen to podcasts, wake up, whatever I want to do. I can't put headphones in. Like I can't wear them on the outside or the inside. So I started like putting them around my neck to play music, but I can't do it because I have to be like so aware of all the things going around me all the time. So it's important to note that because something that works for somebody else may not work for you. And that doesn't mean that that's a problem either. It just means you have to find something different.
So true. Exactly.
Because that's a whole other thing of what's wrong with me. These people with ADHD say that this works great. Why?
Exactly.
I do that, right?
So it's a trial and error. And like you said, like having the hope that like, okay, this someone doesn't work, something else will work, and it has nothing to do with you. It has just to do with life, right? Like it's just everyone's different, and that's okay that everyone has different needs. So good point there.
If there's just like one thing you could tell them to take away from this podcast, if they take nothing else from this, what would you say that they should take away?
Just know that you are not broken for feeling overwhelmed with things. You're exactly who your kids need. It's not you. It's just hard. Just that, like you're enough, and that you can reach out to people. I think like you had said earlier, it's hard when no one's going through the exact same experience, but it's worth trying to like put your story out there, because at some point you may find someone who really resonates with that. And then, you don't want to do this alone. Like you don't want to just sit alone in those terrible feelings and never feeling understood. It's not you. The world is messed up. and you're doing the best you can. And guess what? If it's really hard right now, then that just means that you only have up to go, right? Like it can be less hard next time. If you're at the rock bottom, you only can go up from there.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank you for being a part of this podcast. My beginning of my podcast.
Yeah.
Ground floor, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, I have my website is www.theguidingwell.com. You can email me at ashley@theguidingwell.com as well. So those are the two best places, easy places to find me.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to find you. But thank you again so much. This was such a fun conversation. I'm so glad we did it.
I know, it has been fun. It has.
Remember, you are powerful, you are worthy, you are valued, and you are loved. Keep pushing, keep loving, and most importantly, keep believing in your amazing ability to empower your legacy.